The Transformers have had a long history when it comes to pop culture. Ever since their creation in 1984, the Transformers have had multiple iterations of their history and their story, from animated TV shows to comic books and video games. However, when the average person nowadays is asked what they associate the Transformers franchise with, they are more than likely to say the live-action movies, and it makes sense. The live-action Transformers movies did make a lot of money in the box office, or at least the first four did. This is due in no small part because of the man behind the camera that has made himself synonymous with these movies, Michael Bay. Michael Bay's Transformers movies, or Bayverse movies, have this known reputation, for both good and bad reasons, of being these loud, action-filled blockbusters that are just meant to be watched after turning your brain off and to have some fun. However, amongst Transformers fans, the Bayverse movies are often looked at as a controversial point of contention, as some fans love the movies despite their faults, while others detest what they did to the franchise as a whole.
I'll kill you!
This brings us to the point of this video, answering the question, did Michael Bay ruin Transformers? Ever since the end of the Bayverse movies, the Transformers franchise has continued on with numerous other outings in multiple different mediums. However, none of them seem to reach the same level of success as their predecessors. Could it be that Michael Bay turned the Transformers franchise into something that just should be avoided by the average moviegoer, or is there something else that is playing a factor? In this video, we are going to take a trip down memory lane by looking at the Bayverse movies to see their pros and cons, Decepticons that is, to determine what could have led to the downfall of the Transformers franchise.
Before time began, there was the Cube.
I remember when I was a wee little lad back in 2007, getting to see the first ever live-action Transformers movie on my birthday. It's a day that will stick in my head forever. Getting to see two different factions of giant robots fighting each other as a 7-year-old boy led to me becoming a lifelong fan of the franchise ever since. However, even without the nostalgia goggles, out of all the Bayverse movies, this one is definitely the best out of the 5, which isn't saying much, but it's still pretty good. The first movie does a great job at introducing the Transformers through the eyes of the human characters. One of the best scenes of the entire franchise is easily the scene where Blackout absolutely destroys the military base with little to no problem. The scene is not only the audience's introduction to this universe's Transformers, but also showcases how much of a threat the Transformers can be to humanity in a way that was never seen up until that point. However, the human element of the movie is also the worst part of not just this movie, but of the entire franchise as a whole. Now, in all fairness, this movie is where the human characters are the most tolerable. Once again, that's not a high bar, but it is something. It doesn't help that Sam Witwicky is just such an annoying character to follow, but I will talk about him in a later part of this video. Honestly, Michaela actually makes a better case to be the main character than Sam does. Not only does she have skills that would apply to helping out the Transformers like being a mechanic, she also, at the very least, has an interesting backstory regarding her father and criminal record. The movie could have had her go on an arc of whether or not she had the ability to be a good person despite her past, while having to deal with these giant robots while Sam is just her comedic love interest. The CGI for the Transformers is also amazing. The fact that they were even able to make the transforming, the action, and the design look as good as they do is a true testament to the skills of the VFX artists behind this movie. However, I'm not a huge fan of the designs. They aren't all bad. I do like the design of Ironhide, Bumblebee, and Ratchet. However, I'm not a huge fan of how they made the Decepticons look, especially Megatron and Starscream, but we will talk about them later in the video as well. At least in this movie, you can tell which Decepticons are which, unlike future installments. Apparently, they intended to base the designs of the Transformers off of samurai armor to give a nod to the Japanese origins of the Transformers franchise as a whole.
Like with Optimus, we had to make the ears just a little bit bigger to get a little more of the samurai look.
If you think about where Transformers came from, the robot culture of Japan is in part based on the tradition of samurai armor.
But if you want to pay nod to the Japanese origins, why not just keep the original designs? They were made in Japan. This movie also sets up a problem that is carried through every single one of its sequels, the main villains. With every single Transformers movie, they seem to struggle at making an interesting main villain, and Megatron is no exception. Now, in this movie, he is arguably at his best, but it's because all he is just a typical evil bad guy, and is at least seen as a threat to the Autobots. I mean, this is the Megatron that tore Jazz in half after picking at him like a vulture. However, following this movie, Megatron is nothing but a sidekick to the Fallen, Sentinel Prime, and Quintessa. It isn't until the 4th movie that he becomes his his own villain again, but we only see him fight Optimus in the middle of the movie until Lockdown steps in, and then he's just barking orders at his Decepticons during the final battle. He also just doesn't look like Megatron. The closest we get to a classic Megatron design in these movies is his look in The Last Knight, and it doesn't look that good anyways. Overall, the first movie is pretty good. I would give it a 7 out of 10. It's understandable why Paramount would choose to continue making Transformers movies after this, especially with Michael Bay at the helm. Despite its faults, it is a fun time all around, especially with the final battle. The human storylines aren't anything special, and some of them could have definitely been cut, such as the hackers subplot to give more time to the Transformers themselves. But hey, now that we have established the Transformers, they will definitely be getting way more screen time from now on, right? Right?
There's more to them than meets the eye.
Revenge of the Fallen is an interesting film to say the very least. It's very clear that Bay just took what he did in the first movie and just went, how about more? In this movie, there is more action, more consequences, and unfortunately, more Sam Witwicky.
Constant K rate, extrapolate reach of the...
Despite setting up the Transformers in the previous movie, for some reason, Bay decided that audiences would probably be more willing to watch a movie that is mostly just Sam and his wacky group of friends dick around in an Egyptian desert instead of seeing two factions of giant robots punching and shooting at each other. In all fairness, we do get some action. There is the opening scene that ends in Optimus executing a Decepticon in cold blood, and where we are introduced to the new Autobots, including the twins. Do I really have to say anything about them? It's entirely clear that they are just racist stereotypes.
We don't really do much.
So much to the point that nobody behind this movie wants to take credit for it. The writers of the film, Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman, say that it was Michael Bay's idea, while Bay says that it came from improv between the twins' voice actors Tom Kenny, yes, SpongeBob, and Rena Wilson, despite the two of them saying that they were giving direction to voice the characters like that. Regardless of who exactly is responsible for the twins' inclusion in this movie, Bay or any higher up could have easily had made the decision to not include them. However, getting back to the action, this movie does have one great fight scene in it, with Optimus taking on Megatron, Starscream, and Blackout. The fight scene is just so well thought out and rendered, it's honestly the best fight scene out of the entire series. My favorite moment of the fight is when Optimus cuts off a part of Blackout that goes flying into Megatron as he was firing his gun, causing him to shoot away from Optimus. The VFX artists were given a lot of free reign over the action, and it shows. So much to the point that that scene from the first movie where Jazz is fighting Brawl was a nod to the animated movie that the VFX artists added in. Something you may have noticed is that I kept calling this Decepticon Blackout. But if you watched the first movie, you probably remember that Blackout died in the first movie after getting grenaded in the balls. So you may be asking yourself, did Blackout survive or something? Nope, this is not Blackout. This is Grindor, a totally different Decepticon that just coincidentally looks like Blackout. Does this matter at all in regards to the movie? No, but it is an example of how lazy Bay and the people behind this movie are when it comes to crafting the universe that they completely forgot that they killed Blackout in the first movie, only to just bring him back and have to rename him to try to fix the canon. Speaking of lazy, let's talk about the inclusion, or lack thereof, of RC. Now, it's a little unclear whether or not the three female Autobots we see in this movie are sisters, or just extensions of RC. Like the twins, the writers of the movie and Bay have given different answers, another example of the poor world building concerning this franchise. They also just do her dirty in this movie, as she is barely given any screen time only to get killed off. She was supposed to be in the first movie, but for some reason they thought they would have to explain how female robots are a thing. Who cares? I don't care what a robot's metal genitals are. I just want to see them fight. There's also the problem with Soundwave. What the hell did they do to this guy? Now, if you couldn't tell, I love Soundwave. He has a cool design, a cool voice,
Soundwave superior, Constructicons inferior,
and he has a cool array of minions, and none of those elements are in this movie. The only thing we get is Ravage and Laserbeak being his minions. His design is awful because he just looks like every other Decepticon in these movies, and his voice is nothing special, as he also sounds like every other Decepticon. He's also just a satellite in this movie and does nothing during the second half, almost like they forgot he existed. This movie is just exhausting and filled with wasted potential. So much of this movie is dedicated to characters like Sam's parents and Leo, the most useless character in the entire franchise. The only purpose that Leo serves in the movie is to establish a way for Sam and Seymour Simmons from the first movie to reconnect. Speaking of which, I do have to give Totoro credit for being the only human character worth watching in this franchise, because even with this awful story and direction, he is good enough to make his parts watchable and funny to an extent.
Bumblebee, stop lubricating the man.
Now, in all fairness, this movie was impacted due to the writer's strike during this film's development. However, that's not a good excuse for a lot of the problems concerning this movie, as we are shown with the later movies where the same problems are present, such as most of the focus being on the human characters, confusing stories, and racism. Overall, I would give this movie a 4 out of 10. It's not the worst one, but it is the worst out of the first 3 movies. This was supposed to be the Empire to the Transformers trilogy, only to be The Last Jedi.
We just went to get you a tighter shirt. There isn't a tighter shirt. We checked.
Dark of the Moon feels like what Bay was trying to do with Revenge of the Fallen. It goes bigger with its action scenes and stakes, as well as establishing a history with the Transformers and Earth. The problem with this is that we already got this with Revenge of the Fallen. Something the Bayverse movies love to do is just hit the same old plot points over and over again with each movie. Every movie has a Cybertronian artifact, history revisionism connected to Earth and the Cybertronians, and Optimus Prime executing his enemies.
No, Optimus!
However, despite this, Dark of the Moon is still not as bad as the other sequels. The plot feels more comprehensible and looks better too. The VFX, as always, look amazing. The destruction of Chicago, specifically the VFX used for the collapsing building, is genuinely a work of art. The siege of Chicago is also incredible, showing just how dangerous and bloody an invasion from the Decepticons can be, similar to the military base scene in the first movie. Speaking of bloody, the Decepticons bleed now. They also like to spit. Like, a lot. However, despite the third act of the movie taking place during the Battle of Chicago, and originally meant to serve as the finale for the Autobot-Decepticon War, instead of following the two factions and their actions across the city, we follow the human characters as they are seemingly more effective in taking out the giant robots than the Autobots are. Starscream, one of the most recognizable Transformers of all time, is literally killed off by Sam using tech that he has no idea how to operate. Speaking of Sam, this movie is truly when he is the most insufferable. Now, Sam has always been a loud, obnoxious, rude, selfish man-child, but somehow he only gets worse. Sam's entire story revolves around how he doesn't feel like he is appreciated enough by the people around him, despite his role in the war between the Autobots and Decepticons, even though in the last movie, Sam wanted nothing to do with the war at all. What makes Sam even more insufferable is that it's not like he doesn't live a good life. He has a great apartment in Washington, D.C. that he doesn't pay rent for, and lives with his girlfriend who literally does not have a single problem with the fact that he doesn't have a job. She also looks really different. I wonder why that's the case. Even when given a job in a car by his girlfriend's boss, Sam is still ungrateful. Now, in all fairness, the car does turn out to be Soundwave, but hey, a ride's a ride. I just don't understand why in the last movie of the trilogy we had to spend more time on the human characters that we already spent way too much time on, instead of the giant robots that are the only reason why people are watching these movies in the first place. It would be like watching a Toy Story movie, but the entire movie was centered around Andy with Buzz and Woody just being side characters. We spend more time with characters like Government Lady and Alan Tudyk than we do with Bumblebee and Ironhide, who gets absolutely obliterated by Sentinel Prime. Speaking of Sentinel Prime, I understand why they included him to be a twist where a mentor of Optimus turns to the dark side. However, as the big bad of the film, his character and his relationship with Optimus doesn't really matter. They could have easily replaced him with Shockwave, who is given nothing to do. Shockwave is a scientist. He could have been the one to develop the pillars and, kind of like the animated cartoon, could have disguised himself as an Autobot to keep the plot twist element from Sentinel alive. Like Soundwave, Shockwave is an example of how wasted a lot of the individual Transformers are in these movies. The movie is definitely the best movie that came after the first, however, it fails to expand more on the titular characters that it not only brings the entire movie down, but the entire trilogy as well. This was originally meant to serve as Bay's swan song for the Transformers movies, however, as we know now, this wasn't the case. Bay still had a bit more in the tank, and with the rise of the MCU leading to every studio trying their hand at interconnected universes, Paramount was not going to stop at the chance to capitalize on it. Hopefully, they will learn from their mistakes next time around, right?
No, Optimus!
Now, originally Michael Bay wasn't supposed to come back for this movie, but I guess the money was too green. The reason I mention this is because it almost feels like when it comes to this movie and the next one, you can just tell that Bay's heart isn't in it. I mean, he arguably never had any heart in these movies, he always clearly did it for the paycheck, but these movies just feel a lot more lifeless. It just feels like Bay is going through the motions at this point. It really does show in its plot more than anything else. There's a piece of alien tech that the bad guys want, there's a character in a position of power that is initially against the main character until they are on the good side by the end, and Optimus shows up at the end to kill the main villain Punisher style. However, the biggest problem with this movie comes from its selling point. Now, Bay has said before that he doesn't really care for the Dinobots, and that's fine. I mean, he's wrong, but whatever. A director shouldn't be forced to put something in a movie that they don't want to include. However, they could have done something more to explain what the Dinobots are and where they come from. Instead, all we get is that they were legendary warriors that Lockdown captured. Why do they look like dinosaurs? Who knows? Why include the opening act with the dinosaurs if there is no connection? Who knows? You think this kind of lazy writing in a movie wouldn't exist when they are also trying to establish a more connected universe, which was the plan for these last two movies. However, outside of Optimus being a knight, we don't get much of it. Hell, some of the few things they set up in this movie, like the creators, aren't even paid off in the next movie. There is Quintessa, but she is called the Great Deceiver at one point, so she could be lying, and when we see the creators at the start of this movie, they are obviously something other than Quintessa. So who are they? I mean, Optimus told them that he was coming. You can't just keep them waiting, that's just rude. However, despite the lack of a consistent story and adding any depth to the universe, Bay decides to focus more so on the human characters as per usual. Why see or expand on the giant robots when we could be focusing on Cade Yeager, who definitely sounds like a man from Texas?
The Decepticon that started the Chicago War?
I don't know why anyone would think that this guy would make a compelling main character. He's a dick to everyone around him. He constantly talks about being an inventor while inventing nothing of real value. He's an awful boss and father, and all around a gigantic idiot. I mean, why would you think it's a good idea to have your daughter walk on metal cables hundreds of feet in the air that get more unstable to walk on as you move down them? Where are they even going to get off at? Those cables are just attached to the building. Also, as is shown later, it's super easy to detach those. It's like Cade wanted him, his daughter, and her boyfriend to die together. Speaking of the boyfriend, why is he even here? He literally adds nothing of value to the story. All he does is save them from the bad guys with his cool driving skills, and that's it. And even then, they could have been done by Bumblebee or someone else. In the rest of the movie, he is just a coward and does nothing that couldn't be done by anybody else. All he does in this movie is sleep with a minor. Now this scene has been talked about to death. It's beyond idiotic to have a scene in a movie where one of the main characters essentially admits proudly to being a pedophile. And it's even more idiotic too in that same scene to try to justify it. Why not just make the daughter 18? In the first scene where we see her, she is reacting to getting no aid for college, so it's not out of place to just make her 18, and even then, it is still weird that this man is dating a girl in high school, but at least it's not potentially illegal. Hell, they could just say that he's a minor too, and it's just an aspiring rally car driver. But I guess then you don't have a scene to put your Red Bull ad in. I bet they were very proud of this. The only reason why you would include a scene like this is because you want to justify this kind of relationship, and that is just beyond disgusting. The only real saving grace for this movie, in my opinion, is Stanley Tucci being in it. His charisma saves a lot of the Michael Bay dialogue he has to deliver and, except for Optimus, is the only character that actually has an arc. I also do like how the ranks of the Transformers are down to only 5 of them. However, we don't really get to learn much about them outside of their one-dimensional personalities like the first 5. At least Hound is fun. I do like his battle-hungry attitude, and his comedic lines are probably the only funny things a Transformer says in this movie. This movie is definitely not the worst, but it's close enough. However, despite all the problems in this movie, it still made a ton of money, making more than the first 2 movies did, mostly because of its Chinese propaganda, which honestly, who cares? The first 3 movies are filled to the brim with US propaganda from start to finish, so the fact that the final third of this movie is in China and features so much Chinese propaganda shouldn't matter. The only problem I have with it is that it resulted in Paramount feeling confident enough in making another one.
I'm coming.
Oh god, I do not want to talk about this movie, but I guess I have to. This movie is just a mess filled with underwhelming action, useless side characters that get thrown away after the first third of the movie, terrible editing, constantly shifting aspect ratios, desperate world building, and an overabundance of tropes like the Suicide Squad-esque lineup, and two heroes fighting each other, which Fast and the Furious, DC, and Marvel were already doing at the time. And all it did was make this movie feel like a desperate attempt at getting the audience's attention, unaware that most people already gave up on the franchise at this point. No one wanted to watch Transformers movies anymore, and who could blame them? Most of the screen time was taken up by the insufferable human characters instead of the titular Transformers. And when they were given focus, they were either completely one-dimensional or were based on racial stereotypes. Arguably, no other character suffers from this more than Optimus Prime. At the start of the franchise, he is very faithful to his original characterization. He is hopeful, inspiring, and self-sacrificing to a fault. However, as the movies go on, he becomes a rage-filled executioner who only wants to kill anyone in his way. In most of the movies, they even write him out of the movie for no reason at all. In Revenge of the Fallen, he dies halfway through. In Dark of the Moon, he spends way too much time in the final battle trapped in cables, and in this movie, he's just talking to Quintessa despite the marketing of the movie focusing on Optimus being evil for the most part. He fights Bumblebee one time and then immediately is a good guy again, and that's towards the end of the movie. You'd think for being the most recognizable Transformer, Bay would try to put more of a focus on him, or even Bumblebee for that matter. But why spend time with them when we can spend time with Mark Wahlberg? At least the previous movies, even Age of Extinction, while being stupid movies filled with problems, were at least fun to watch. This one isn't even fun to make fun of, it's just a slog to get through. Even with my problems with these movies, I'm still likely to put them on to at least have a fun time where I can just shut off my brain and enjoy the main shapes and colors in front of me, except for this one. It's boring, it's all over the place, and it's a waste of time. If you want to watch all of these movies in a row, just don't bother with this one. It is easily the worst and you will not miss a thing skipping it. Now to answer the title of this video. Did Michael Bay ruin Transformers? Yes. And no. Michael Bay, from the start, did not want to direct these movies, and, obviously, only did them for a paycheck. Now, would these movies, if they had a director who actually wanted to make them, or, at least, was a fan of the source material, be better movies overall? Maybe. Would they be as successful? Maybe, but we don't know for sure. From the first movie to the third one, these movies only made more money over time. Even with Revenge of the Fallen being considered a terrible movie, even when it came out, Dark of the Moon still did great, and I do think it's because of Bay's involvement. However, it's the same involvement that arguably killed the franchise. When Age of Extinction came out, most people were just sick of these movies. Even though Age of Extinction made more money than the first two movies, the American box office for it was the lowest at that point, with only the international box office saving it, and as I said beforehand, most of that was because of the pandering to the Chinese audience. While I do believe Bay's involvement with the first three movies did play a factor in their success, I do think that going with someone else for the fourth and following movies could have saved the franchise. After the failure of The Last Knight, Hasbro and Paramount stepped away from making any Transformers movies outside of Bumblebee due to it already being in the works for a while. It wasn't until 2023 where we got a new live-action Transformers movies in the form of Rise of the Beast. However, it did not do well in the box office, making the least amount out of all the live-action movies. The following year, Transformers 1 came out, and despite high praise from fans, it also failed in the box office, making even less than Rise of the Beast, with most of the blame going to the poor marketing of the movie. Now, these failures could be placed on Bay and how he made the Transformers franchise toxic to the eyes of the average moviegoer. However, I think most of the blame should be put on Paramount and Hasbro for not trying their hardest to promote and market these movies. We are at that point that most people have essentially forgotten about the Bayverse movies and would more than likely go back to watching Transformers movies if given a good reason to. However, there is a fatigue out there for these kind of franchise movies such as the MCU, and I do think Transformers has suffered because of that. However, while the Transformers movies haven't done that well since The Last Knight, the Transformers franchise has continued to roll on ever since. Ever since 2017, Transformers has released a multitude of animated TV shows and has launched their comic book series under Skybound and the Energon universe. Speaking of which, I absolutely love this series, and if you are a Transformers fan, especially in regard to G1, you will love this book as it takes a look at G1's Transformers and updates it for the modern times and for a more mature audience. Starscream literally squishes a guy with his bare hands. So while Bay's involvement with the Transformers franchise did arguably impact its future success in regards to its movies, the Transformers franchise is always going to keep marching forward, providing its wide range of fans with something that will appeal to someone. And when it comes to its movies, as long as Paramount and Hasbro are willing to really put in effort to get the movies in front of the eyes of more people, they need to go all in or make something with a smaller budget to appeal to Transformers fans and try to make your money back that way. Hopefully they don't just go crawling back to Michael Bay for a quick buck. So originally I was just going to leave it there, end off on that joke about Bay potentially coming back to direct another Transformers movie. However, after finishing the script, I got to thinking about it and I wanted to add this little segment right here. Now, it hasn't been directly confirmed if Bay is 100% coming back to direct the next Transformers movie. However, I wouldn't put it past Paramount to bring him back in hopes that the general public will get excited about it. Not only do I believe that this won't work in general, I just think it's a showcase of what is wrong with these big franchise movies nowadays. It gives off the same vibe of Marvel bringing back the Russos for Doomsday and Secret Wars. It's just disappointing that instead of trying something new in hopes of it succeeding, these studios just go back to the same old as a Hail Mary. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that Bay actually comes back to the franchise because he just has a story that he wants to tell with these characters and not just for a paycheck, but his track record doesn't really back that up. Now, he has had some good work since leaving the franchise. I really enjoyed Six Underground, but there hasn't been anything else that makes me believe that Bay is going to do anything different than what he did before. I hope we get a Transformers 1 and not an Age of Extinction, but we will have to wait and see. Well, this was fun. I always loved these movies growing up, at least the first three, and while my opinion of them has changed since, it is still fun to go back and watch these movies every now and again, except for the last night. Regardless, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and please leave down below what you love and what you don't about these movies. I'd love to see what y'all think, but until then, leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this. I do enjoy making these videos despite the time that it takes for them with my busy schedule, and leaving a like and subscribing helps me feel more confident and motivated to make more. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.